like to welcome all the participants, all those who are attending the session here today. So I'd like to start this second roundtable, which we are going to talk on cities under transformation. So for those who don't know me, I'm Nico Caltabiano. I'm the project manager of the Klimapolis laboratory, and I'm based here in Hamburg, in Germany, at the Max Planck Institute for Meteorology. And it's a pleasure to have such a very, very nice participation in this roundtable with, as I said, participants from here in Europe, basically in Germany, and also from the US. So I'm not going to delay a lot and give the participation, the chance for the speakers to give their presentation. So we are going to have 4 presentations of 20 minutes. So for the speakers, just to know, when it's about 2 minutes to the end of your presentation, I'll give you a nudge, just so you know that we should wrap up. And then at the end, hopefully we are going to have some time for some questions from the public as well. So I will start with Fernando Luis Lara from University of Texas at Austin in the United States. Fernando is the director of the graduate program in architectural history at the University of Texas and holds the Potter Rose Professorship in Urban Planning. In many of his works, he has discussed the modern and contemporary architecture of our continent, its meaning, context, and socioeconomic insertion. Fernando is also a member of editorial boards in Colombia, Brazil, and Chile. And Fernando is going to talk on the environmental agenda and the results of the partnership between São Judas University and the University of Texas, which I know have been long established through Ana, Renato, and I guess you, Fernando, as well. So Fernando, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Nico. Well, before I do my talk, please allow me to say a few words in Portuguese for the audience. Muito obrigado a todos, prazer enorme estar aqui com vocês. Obrigado pelo convite e pelo carinho da Universidade de São Judas. Thank you all so much. I will apologize for the very tight schedule. I will do my presentation and I'll have to leave for a small meeting, for a short meeting. I hope to come back for the debate a little later. So please don't cut me out of the presenters group once I turn off my video. My partnership with Ana Paula Curi goes way back. We have worked together for many, many years. She is a beloved co-author. Can I share my screen? Is that possible?
Yeah, you should have the share screen at the bottom.
I got it.
Yeah, fantastic.
I got it. Thank you. I don't know when we started this partnership. I'm lost in time. I try to remember, but I know it was almost a decade ago. And there was an opportunity in 2014, I believe, to apply to a grant by FAPESP and the University of Texas, a research initiative between the two institutions. And we got the grant, and we did a number of initiatives together. I will show you some here. We did a seminar in Austin, in which people from São Paulo came. We published a book that summarizes the whole work of the studio that we did. We were at Itaim Paulista in 2015, I believe, or 2016. I think 2015. That's when we did the 2 parallel studios, and the book came out in 2016. But let me put those things a little bit in perspective before I talk about the Itaim Paulista work itself. This is a perspective on Itaim Paulista based on my current scholarship. This is a work by a Brazilian artist called Laís Mirra. Laís Mirra have an installation portfolio several installations in which she develops a very powerful critique of architecture, especially a very powerful critique of modern architecture. I consider myself a scholar of modern architecture, and I see the critique of Laís Mirra as a very important new component for us to discuss. And I want to bring that conversation into the Itaim Paulista project. In this installation, in another installation that she did for the São Paulo Art Biennale in 2016, the year that we were doing the book, she put two towers right in the middle of the Ibirapuera Biennale Pavilion. One tower was made of brick and concrete and steel, and it was, of course, the modern tower. The other tower was made of wood and raw mud and thatch. So that was the traditional tower, or the colonial tower. And she's been working on that mode for many, many years. She has other installations about concrete, about cement, about the way in which we build our modern cities, and the dark side of that modernization, which is what I wanted to talk about. In this installation done at the Gwangju Biennale in South Korea in 2018, the architects, all of us can recognize the big column that she recreated on a 1:1. So that's the real scale of the column of the Alvorada Palace in Brasilia, the residence of the Brazilian president. And the Alvorada column is supported by this other column, that is the column of the Fazenda Columbandê. And the Columbandê is a farm, it's a plantation very close to Rio, in the Baixada Fluminense. It's very, very close to Rio, and it's one of the first farms. It's from the 17th century. So it's before the coffee plantations of São Paulo and Vale do Paraíba. It's a sugarcane plantation from the 17th century in Rio de Janeiro. For us architectural historians, for us that write about architecture, we are very familiar with how Lúcio Costa articulated the modern and the colonial. The idea that for Lúcio Costa, the modern architecture of his group, the group of himself and Oscar Niemeyer and Afonso Reide and Carlos Leão, etc., how they were rooted in the Brazilian colonial times. Of course, this articulation bypasses the 19th century in order to diminish the presence of any 19th century initiative and go way back to the 18th century. But they stayed in the realm, Lúcio Costa and his group stayed in the realm of aesthetics, in the realm of materiality. The modern colonial relationship is much, much deeper. There is a body of literature that we call the decolonial theory that came up after the 1990s, after Quijano and Wallerstein, first major publication 92, then Arturo Escobar 1995, Mignolo, Walter Mignolo, Eduardo Dussel, Maria Lugones, Gloria Anzaldúa. There is a whole body of scholarship that proposes the following for all of us to reflect. There is no modernization without colonization. There is no modernity without coloniality. They are one and the same. In that way of reading the work, reading the word through those lenses, we perceive that modernization have always supported and enhanced the role of the white heterosexual male and colonized everybody that is non-white, non-male, or non-heteronormative. And we can, I don't have time to elaborate too much into that, but this is the ontological foundations of what I want to present, what I want to present as a provocation. Now, how does that apply to our territory? Last year, we had those protests in Santiago, Chile. And this is a powerful image of the Mapuche flag being raised on top of the statue of Baquedano in Plaza Italia. Now, I think they are renaming Plaza Italia as the Plaza of the People or something like that in downtown Santiago. But it's the understanding of that, those deep tragedies that we have all over the Americas. The tragedy of colonization, the tragedy of the Amerindian Holocaust, and the tragedy of slavery. Those two major dramas of the 16th, 17th, 18th century, all the way into 19th century, in the case of Brazil, are still with us. And our work is framed, our cities are framed by those tragedies. I published a book that talks about the entire 20th century, the entire Latin America. It does not have that much of a decolonial perspective, except for the effort of putting all of Latin America together in one book. But nowadays, what I'm working today, and I think it has a lot to do with the challenges of Itaim Paulista, is to discuss the role of architecture and planning, the role of the design disciplines in all of this. We designed all those cities. I mean, we can blame some of the problems on informality, etc., but the strategy, the system that we have in our cities today was designed by us, architects and leaders and scholars and economic and intellectual elites of the Americas. The point that I want to make is that architecture played a role in that colonization. The instruments that we use are the same instruments of colonization. There is no coincidence that architecture developed as an independent discipline at the same time of the European occupation of the Americas in the 16th and 17th century. The instruments and the tools and the result of that process that we call modernization are the same of the process that we call colonization. And we architects from Alberti, who published a few years before the encounter of the Americas in Europe, and everybody that came later worked under that framework and developed the tools to systematize, organize, and control this territory. And we can see all of that in Itaim Paulista. This is some of the projects that our students did in 2016. It's not the reality of Itaim Paulista, but the issue of how we deal with water, how we channelized our urban creeks, how we have no green space at all, how we have huge transportation problems because all the infrastructure of the 19th and 20th century are concentrated downtown, and the working class was left to their own devices. As Chico de Oliveira already reminded us, there's a project there. There's a project there to let people build their own houses, because that way we don't need to pay them as much with the capitalist system of the 20th century. So we can lower the income, we can lower the labor costs by allowing people to build their own houses anywhere that the land is not available for development. So anywhere that the land is cheap, either the hills of Rio de Janeiro or the floodplains of São Paulo, let people build their homes there, because if they do it, then we have cheap labor and we don't need to increase the labor cost. So there is a colonization side to all those decisions. Even the modernizing decisions of bringing the subway to Itaquera or improving the rail connection in the north of the area, or trying to build the subway/rail to Guarulhos Airport, which is also kind of close to Itaim. All those decisions that we are facing today have a colonization side. And in Itaim, we face that when, for instance, the expansion of the main north-south connection would be done by displacing all the commercial activities that are right there on the sidewalk of that narrow road. So facing that, we need to work on participatory processes. Here is the drawing that I wanted to show. This is the north-south connection as it is now, and this is the proposed expansion enlargement. And in gray, all the buildings that would be completely demolished, and in light gray, the ones that would be partially demolished. We need to work on participatory processes. We need to mitigate this modernization, colonization conundrum and develop new strategies to really create empowerment for the population that lives there. I think the work that Ana Paula Curi is doing is amazing. I think it's in the avant-garde of these kinds of processes. I see her effort on sustaining this partnership. I see her effort on serving the students from the area. And I just wanted to finish with a big compliment to her efforts and to the work that is being done at Itaim. Thank you all for the opportunity to talk today. I hope I didn't talk too much or too long, and I will join you in about an hour or so in the debate. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Fernando. It was really nice to hear of the experience and the partnership that you developed with São Judas over the years. Just a reminder to all participants, please, if you have any questions that hopefully we will have time to discuss with the panelists at the end, put your questions in the Q&A box. The questions that were there from the first session, we didn't throw them away. We are going to try to respond somehow, perhaps ask the panelists from the first session to put in writing those answers for those questions in the LAB Itaim Paulista blog. So if you have questions to any of the participants from this session, Fernando, Anita, Catherine, and Renato, please put your questions in the Q&A box. So let's go for the second speaker of this session is Anita Engels from University of Hamburg. So we are crossing the pond from Texas to Germany. Anita is a professor of sociology at the University of Hamburg. She's specialized in globalization, environment, and society. She's the co-spokesperson of the Cluster of Excellence, Climatic Change and Society, CLICS. She's also one of the co-directors of the Klimapolis laboratory, together with Rita, for those who were here during Rita talk. So she introduced Anita already. As a sociologist, Anita has spent the last 20 years investigating the link between climate change and society and work on climate governance and globalization research. And she's going to talk of her experience in a project that she leads here in Hamburg. So the talk will be dealing with multi-perspectivity in real-world laboratories, experiences from the transdisciplinary research project Urban Transformation in Lochstedt here in Hamburg. Anita, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nico, and hello to everyone who is joining this wonderful workshop. Hello to Ana Paula, who has invited me. Thank you very much. And thank you also to Fernando. I would like to take you from Fernando's talk about the role of design and architecture to the role of design and project architecture. So a slightly different turn on the topic, but I will talk, as Nico said, about how we designed a lab, a project, and I'm trying to share my screen with you. Thailand, this one, yes. And now I start the presentation. I hope that works. Yes, Can you see that?
Okay. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. The lab I'm talking about is situated in Lockstedt, which is a part of Hamburg, and I brought you some pictures here on that first slide. We consider this to be a densely populated part of Hamburg, and Anna Paula and I have been with a group of colleagues engaged in a publication project together, comparing the incomparable, the two labs, which are really very different. But I think sometimes we have very interesting perspectives on what we can learn from those labs. So I want to talk about the challenge and the problem of multi-perspectivity in real-world labs, and I will talk about the example of Lockstedt, the Lockstedt lab. So just to give you some very brief background information, we have received for this lab project funding from a federal research funding program for 3 years. It started in 2016, and then with an interruption due to administrative problems and also, of course, due to the pandemic situation, we received another round of funding, and that just started this month, so for another 2 years. The goal in this urban transformation lab was that we wanted to create transformative local action agendas in 3 fields, action fields that were suggested by the city: household energy, mobility, and waste management. And the question was, how can we reconcile climate protection as an overarching goal of the city with urban development requirements that have to be dealt with anyhow, and with local citizen priorities. And so if you have such a constellation, it's at the moment, it's very common in Germany and in other places to start such transformation labs and to create socially robust, transformative local action agendas. I will be talking about the partners and how they were able to collaborate in such a project, because it's all about communicating and bringing together these different perspectives to go forward, to promote somehow transformational change. And in the first project phase, we had 2 universities. We had the city government represented by the Environment Ministry, which was really the official partner of the project and also received funding from the research funding agency. And the partner that we had there was the coordinating body at the ministry, which is responsible for all the official climate activities in Hamburg. Then 1 level below that, we had the district administration responsible for Lockstedt, where the lab is located. We have 7 districts in Hamburg, and we had a number of practice partners. And the methodology is represented by this nice drawing, but I won't go into detail here because today it's not about what we did and how we did it, but how we communicated and how we dealt with the challenge that each of the partners really brings in to such a lab, completely different perspectives, institutional logics, and also expectations, what to take out of such a project, and maybe also hidden agendas. And so that is the topic of my talk. But just briefly, the steps 1 to 7 were conducted in each of these 3 action fields, a number of public meetings, expert discussions, surveys, and so on. So that was a very interactive process. Now, what I want to say about the multi-perspectivity is that, and I want to try to describe this very briefly and sketchy. The 2 universities, they come to such a research, for them it's a research project, right? They get funding for a research activity. So it is more or less a very academic perspective at the beginning. It's about research and applications, and there are also some links to teaching. So I tried to connect the project to my teaching programs, and others did so as well. Then the city government with the environment ministry is of course in a completely different world. The environment ministry, and especially this coordinating body on climate policies in Hamburg, wants to really get a prestigious achievement in the field of climate change, climate protection. The city has CO2 reduction goals, and of course it would be great if such a project could help to achieve these climate reductions. But what you can see from the logic in which the environment ministry operates is that it's really always looking to position itself in a system of party competition. We have a political coalition in Hamburg, which forms the government between the Green Party and the Social Democrats. The environment ministry is in the hands of the Green Party, but of course it's not the strongest ministry among all the other ministries. So it's also always about gaining symbolic and strategic power in the competition between the different ministries, which are embedded in the party competition. So this is really very, very political. And then one level below that, the district administration, they are the ones who are really in charge of implementing all the programs. You know, they have the right to do so, but also the obligation. So they are at the front, you know, and they are always meeting very locally the citizen groups with their legitimate complaints about what the government, the city government decided, and there's always a constant struggle. So what the district administration really had in mind was to gain legitimacy with regard to the local citizens, to reduce their stress level, you know, while implementing urban planning. And also they were looking for ways of how to moderate conflicts between the different interest groups. Because if you have two open conflicts, then it's really difficult to implement urban planning. And then we had a lot of practice partners. They had very topic-specific perspectives on the lab. And then we had, what we needed to do was to address citizen groups and to make them interested in our lab, to really get a good connection. So of course, they brought in very different perspectives as well. And I will now go into that a little bit deeper. So I try to draw the relationships between these different partners and the groups that were involved with the project. And as you can see, the 4 blue fields that are connected like with a red ring, they were the former project partners, and we really managed to work very tightly together. The project funding provided a full-time staff member for each of these partners for the 3 years. So it was really a very equal collaboration, and also a very dense collaboration. And that enabled us to develop a good understanding for each other's perspectives. The practice partners were always in charge of bringing in their very specific topical expertise on energy, mobility, waste management. And then we had very interesting, very different citizen groups that were interested in bringing their energy into the project. We had on the one side the future lab of the, that's a German expression, the Bürgerhaus. It's a house where citizens meet. They had a very long tradition of civil engagement in Lokstedt. And the people who were organized there are very much interested in topics of energy transition, climate-friendly mobility in the city, higher better air quality, better living conditions, and so on. So they had a very broad idea of what needs to be changed, and they were very pro-change. And they had a very collaborative approach, especially with the city government and with the district administration. So they really tried to use our project for their own local priorities. And then the second citizen group, Lebenswertes Lokstedt, a livable Lokstedt, that was a single issue initiative, very different from the first example. They really tried to organize around defending their access to urban garden lots. That's a very specific topic in German cities, that public spaces are available for urban garden lots and people can use it. They don't own it, but they can use it, and they have the feeling that, yeah, this really belongs to me, and if someone takes it away, then it's a huge conflict. And the district administration was planning to switch this region because they are really responsible and really under pressure to build new houses, to provide affordable housing. So this is the kind of conflict that was going on, and they really tried very hard to use, climate protection arguments to buy themselves into our transformative lab, because they said, if we cut these trees, if we get rid of the gardens here, then of course that's a problem for the climate. But they were very, very anti-collaborative and very much fighting. There were also other citizen initiatives and associations, but I will skip this because they're not so important for the point that I want to make. Over time, the composition changed a little bit, and I will explain that later. I hope you can see that some colors are fading, whereas the color of the future lab burger house is really brightening, and that is to symbolize changing importance. So now we have, for the new project phase, we have a completely changed structure of partners. We have the University of Hamburg, which really grew together with the district administration. We have very trusting relationships, and we said that now we want to bring the project, the lab, the future lab forward. And we invited the Future Lab in Lokstedt, the Bürgerhaus, as official partners into the program because they have this really good standing, very close proximity to the citizens. I mean, they are the citizens. So we made them official partner, and we even hired one member of this Future Lab as a staff in the University of Hamburg to take to work for this project. It's funded by this national program, but the Future Lab, the Bürgerhaus, they are too small. They can't hire someone even if they get funding. So the university stepped in and did that. And then the government level retreated. That was very interesting because they discovered that the closer we got to the ground, to the citizens, and to this conflict level, and also the more we really tried to transform things, the more difficult it became for them because of all these political connections to really have a close tie, a close link to our project. So they stepped back and said, yeah, we still support you, but from the background, we can't use you now as we used to do in the first phase. So I'm coming to my conclusions. We have now for the second project phase, of course, again, very different perspectives coming to this lab, to the real world lab, and trying to use the project for their own purposes, but it has changed a lot. So it's revised in some sense. The university, my university, which is now the only university partner, really switched perspective from this strong academic orientation to a much higher practice orientation, because we realized that we really need to be close to the ground, understand the processes there much better if we want the lab, the real world lab, to contribute to change at all. And we can also use we are perceived as politically neutral. So we can be, without any problem, the official employer of the person sent by the Future Lab, by the Citizen Initiative. They couldn't work, they couldn't be hired by the city, that would be co-opted, but university is okay. The Future Lab, you know, became turned from an outsider, an addressee of the lab, to the host of the whole thing. We rented through them, we rented a room and a meeting, an office and a meeting room right in the middle of Lokstedt, and they are now really the hosts of the whole thing. So they think, and I think that they are right, like this, in the second phase, they can much better advance their own local agenda. The district administration, if you remember, they really wanted to have a better understanding of the conflicts and a better, increased legitimacy when they want to implement something. So they really also changed a lot their perspective. They became change agents now. So they want to gain leverage in this multi-level governance system in the city, so that they are better able than before to create space for change, to really support the transformative change agenda. And as I said, the city government is more or less out of the game. So that's very dramatic change, one could say. And this is, I think, my last slide, in which I want to try to make sense of these experiences and explain why I am so obsessed with this multi-perspectivity. Because, I mean, if you bring these different institutions, people together in a project, you want to advance things. And you can always say, okay, what's the problem? We are working on the same project. But we chose really from the beginning that this multi-perspectivity, the acknowledgement that we all come from totally different worlds and also have different goals that we want to pursue in such a project. We try to give room to that. So all the project partners try to live with the differences, make the best use of the differences, instead of ignoring or denying or always trying to overcome them. That led to a process, a very dynamic process in which the project drifted, over time, as I tried to explain that it developed a life of its own, because some of the partners really developed ownership, you could say. They took over, the Citizen Initiative. They are now the hosts of the whole lab. While others left the consortium, or we tried to keep them out, or they stepped to the background voluntarily. And I think the most important shift in this multi-perspectivity is a shift in balance from, it was all the city government that initiated the project in the first place, to the local citizen initiative. And it's a completely different project now. So on the one hand, we are really much closer to the local priorities. It's really, for me, that is a real success of this, the development of the project. But on the other hand, and at the same time, we are much further away from the political decision process. So what does that mean as preconditions for the transformation, which would be more successful? Very difficult to say, and maybe you want to discuss this question or others. This is the last picture. That's our lab now on the street, parking day in Lockstedt. And the woman in the middle is the person who we hired from the Citizen Initiative. And just started. And with this image, I would like to stop and thank you for your attention and greetings from Hamburg. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anita. It's really nice to see the evolution of the project since you first presented in the first Klimapolis workshop. So it is nice to see that this evolution and how things changed, but for good or worse, but they changed. Then you need to adapt to the project to that. So great, thanks very much. So let's move to our third speaker of this session, and we are going to cross the pond again back to the US, to the east coast of the US. So we have the pleasure to have here Catherine Civit Nordenson from the City College of New York. Catherine is a professor and director of the Landscape Architecture program at the City College of New York. Her work explores adaptation to climate change in urban environments and the novel transformation of landscape restoration practices. She also examines the intersection of political power, environmental activism, and public health, particularly as seen through the design of public space in policy. And changing a little bit what has been mentioned now, she's going to give some examples of things in a coastal area, particularly in New York, which suffers in a different perspective. So she's going to talk on reimagining climate resilience at Jamaica Bay, New York. So Catherine, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nico, and thank you so much to Ana Paula, and also to my fellow panelists, Anita and Fernando, for those great presentations. As Nico mentioned, I'm in New York City. I have a great love of Brazil. Eu falo português. Eu ser muito feliz ser com vocês hoje. Faz muito tempo que não estava em Brasil, então você tem grande vergonha que não fala bem. But it's a great pleasure, a grande prazer to be with you. And I met Ana Paula in New York, actually, at City College when she was a Fulbrighter. Eu morei no Brasil quando eu fui Fulbrighter muitos anos atrás. So it's really great to close the circle again and to continue our collaboration. So thank you so much for the invitation to join you today. I'm a scholar of Roberto Burle Marx. He's my great passion. But I also do a lot of work with coastal resilience and the landscape. So I'm going to share one project with you today of an ongoing suite of projects that I have been working on with my partners here in New York City at an area of the city called Jamaica Bay. So I'm just going to try to bring this up to full screen there. So this may be something anyone who's ever been to New York will know this site quite well. I'm going to speak a little bit about a research project that we've done with funding from the National Science Foundation, so a federal agency in partnership with my university, City College of New York, and Princeton University. And I'd like to also acknowledge my husband and partner in all things, Guy Nordenson and Rennie Jones, who worked together with us on this project for the head of Bay. So I mentioned that you may know this area because here is JFK Airport. So whenever we get our passports back, you may be flying in. This is a top-down view of the boroughs of New York. You can see Manhattan here. I'm sitting right around here. And very far to our southeast is this large coastal embayment called Jamaica Bay. The airport, as you can see, is here. And this drawing essentially gives you the watershed. So what I'm looking at today, and I think it's quite a nice conversation to have with Anita and Fernando, is the role also of landscape and landscape architecture in terms of planning and thinking about resilience as the climate changes in this great emergency in which we find ourselves. This is looking at a few images of flood impact on that bay. So you can see the coastal embayment here right at the Atlantic is heavily impacted by storm surge and flooding. And this is just looking at incremental flooding over time. As surges may occur, this goes up to a 20-foot surge elevation. So beyond what we saw with Sandy. But we have multiple forces impacting the bay. One is this storm surge, which we know very well from our experience with Hurricane Sandy in 2012, that you get these incredible surges of water that are very, very high, and the flood impacts are great. But we also have something coming not just from the ocean, but from the sky. So we're getting increases in inundation from multi-perspective aspects of the environment. This is from the atmosphere with extreme rainfall. So this is something we're experiencing much more with the climate transformation, with a much hotter and wetter climate here in New York. And of course, everywhere. You have the same issues, I believe, in Sao Paulo with the increased rainfall. Springtide is another sort of daily insidious issue where we have this twice daily tidal inundation along the coasts. But we have these very extreme spring tides, which occur every month in concert with the moon rise and its pull. And that high tide level is getting higher and higher to the point where neighborhoods such as this one, Meadowmere, which is at the northeast corner of Jamaica Bay's embayment, has a range of watery conditions like this. So again, I think thinking about the projects that Fernando was showing that he had worked on with the partnership with Ana Paula, there are these conditions of urban streams which we can't ignore any longer. We can no longer just channelize. This isn't necessarily channelized at this edge, but you can see marsh migrating into the yards of these very houses at the back bay. That's actually a zoom into this tiny little corner up here, if you can see my arrow on the screen. So here we have the vast Jamaica Bay and the airport. And of course, post-Sandy, there's been a number of initiatives, mostly by the US Army Corps of Engineers, proposals to close that bay to essentially wall it off from the ocean through a continuous line of protection that you see in this multicolored dotted line, which would be this idea that you can draw a hard line in the sand and create a binary condition of wet and dry. And we actually argue that it's a little bit, well, actually much more complex than that. We have to really think about not only keeping the ocean at bay, but also thinking about the rainfall that's coming from above from that vast watershed. And we can't forget that, like most cities, our planning has been one of erasure in many ways, not just of cultures and underrepresented peoples, but certainly of the environment itself and the marshes in our condition here at Jamaica Bay, which were so extensive. So what you see here in the green is the marshland that existed in the late 19th century with the overlay of the streets and the urbanization on that footprint over time. Here in the aerial map, you're looking at an aerial map from 1924, so the kind of beginnings of the great urbanization expansion of New York City with the overlay of those marshes, and the blue gives you the kind of current day footprint. So you can see what JFK Airport used to look like in this corner of the screen. And this is just a kind of incremental change over time from the last 100 years or 120 years of what was once a kind of very robust marsh platform that absorbed water, that worked with the ebbs and flows of the tides, and how it was slowly and then indeed rapidly between the 20s and the 50s urbanized and filled, and this transformation of one ecosystem into a very, very different one, an urban ecosystem of hardscape. So the site that we're looking at with this particular research project was looking at the back part of the area around Jamaica Bay's JFK Airport. So this is called Head of Bay. It's actually the highest elevation. So much of the watershed delivers water from this tributary here, which creates this bay called the Head of Bay, and then flows outward to the ocean along that area. You can see it in this old map here prior to the airport's construction. Here we see this radical transformation of fill with the construction of the airport. So it's the big elephant in the bay. It's the biggest concern. It's managed by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and it's the economic engine of the region, if not the nation. It's the busiest international airport in the US. So how do we reconcile the need for protection, but also expansion and support of these marsh ecosystems, which we now know to be so important in mitigating the impacts of storm surge and flooding, as well as absorbing excess rainfall, yet doing that in some way where we start to think about how can one equitably start to think about releasing our footprint, our urban footprint at the edge. So one of the things we looked at early on in this project was to think about what could one do in terms of where is the high ground. So if you follow this yellow line, it's the contour line of 20 feet above sea level. And if one were to imagine a shortcut, as it were, we could connect those two high points of this ridge at the Rockaway Peninsula and then the high ground above the airport here at Howard Beach. So what we propose is essentially a kind of dual protection system in some ways, which allows a certain level of hard infrastructure, but really emphasizes the role and the importance of the softer landscape-driven infrastructures, which include the wetland complex. So the yellowish orange line here is a kind of high line of protection that would, in a very extreme storm surge produced by hurricane, protect this entire area in the hatched yellow color. And then the second sort of more everyday flooding protection is this pink line in the back. So our notion is that we would keep this mostly open. It would only close at these points here in terms of a very, very high storm impact, but rather we would create a kind of elevated street, which would allow for some protection from the everyday flooding, from the increasing tidal surge, of the tidal inundation, the kind of diurnal changes in water level, but at the same time allow for the marsh to continue to migrate upward, for rainfall to be flowing through the bay and providing sediment to nourish the rest of the marshes within the bay, and to allow for a way of understanding this as a reservoir, a place to hold water over time. So much of the research was really looking at the variables. We looked at different storm conditions over time. So on this matrix, you see the time advancing to the right, and then the various water levels produced by either tides or surges under different flood conditions. And this section essentially gives you a little bit of an idea of what I explained of like the higher outer barrier, which would generally be part of a gate system that would be operated only in very extreme situations. But the tidal barrier raised street is something that actually allows one to understand where might things get wet. And so even if one is in the area that's not behind that level, there's an awareness of where one is. So some of these images give you a little bit of a sense of how we imagined this new infrastructure might actually be an amenity to those communities which are nearby the neighborhood. So here you're seeing the higher flood barrier could be transformed into a bike path, jogging path, a place for equitable recreation and providing new green space to an area which really needs it. We have some of the most marginalized New York communities living in that zone behind the airport. This gives you a view of the berm at the front line of the airport and the closure that would occur across this one runway, which actually projects into the marsh, as well as at the opening to the head of bay. And here we see an image of that raised street where we see one side is not going to be impacted by the kind of daily tidal increases, but this side, which is on the bay side or the water side of the raised street, would need to adapt accordingly. So one thing that we're really thinking about very actively is how to think about actionable progress and adaptation in the urban realm and in the planning realm for acknowledging the fact that places will be wet and people will be at risk. The last image that I'll show is this elevated evacuation route, which is the idea that you could actually have places that are safe for egress during a storm, but you can also allow for flow of marsh images below that harder infrastructure. I'll share a little bit about some of the technical work that we did with scientists at Princeton University, creating a mesh of the bay and then running hydrological models to actually test various projected storms over different conditions of sea level rise and storm intensity. That actually allowed us to create simulations about what would be the benefit of the proposal. So this is a kind of before and after simulation where this is no protection at all. This shows you what would be protected if the outer barrier were indeed activated, and you can see the extent of flooding that is reduced. This image gives you a bit of the notion of the rainfall capture, or the way of actually collecting and holding water in that basin at the upper head of bay. So you can see the elevated street line, and then everything within here could be a way to help augment and contains rainfall, so these incredible storms that we have in terms of water coming from the atmosphere into the ground, collecting and slowly dispersing that water to the bay, and actually allowing for more sediment flow, which benefits that marsh ecology. These are a few sections through what we call the floodway, or a way that's actually an area that's actually planned to hold water in the case of extreme rainfall. The last thing that I'll show of the project is a few of these images of how we might think about adapting architecture and residential and commercial architecture within the region. This is a little corner to the south of the airport, an area called Bayswater, and we zoom into a little square here to show how over time neighborhoods and communities could actually start to adapt to increasing water levels, and that this project is one that could be implemented slowly and gradually over time. And of course, over time, we're seeing sea level rise as well. So some of the strategies that we're taking are looking at elevated tidal barriers for egress on certain larger boulevards. Houses which are in an inundation zone would be elevated. And then we would see more of these incremental changes over time as we increase the layers of protection. This brings us up to 2100, and then just a little zoom in at the neighborhood scale, showing how streets could be elevated, parts of houses and elements of public spaces, even housing for multiple families, could be made flood-proofed in some ways, or wet flood-proofing is the term that's used in the planning departments now, and how we can start to continue to live within this coastal edge, but with an understanding that we truly need to adapt to these changing conditions while allowing the mitigation benefits of a healthy marsh ecology to be covalent with that same urban plan. So this is just a wrap-up slide showing some of the benefits of this layered system of storm mitigation features, from the marsh islands to the levees and surge barriers. But we really want to think about addressing a range of conditions without obstructing the downstream stormwater runoff and the sediment flow that's so important for the health of the wetland ecosystem. So really, by leveraging existing topographies, we hope to really reduce the ecological and impacts, and indeed the overall cost of these protection adaptation features, but at the same time really make an open dialogue about who is included in this, how are people possibly moved from harm's way that are in these areas which are increasingly repetitively inundated, and how to make the most equitable choices at the municipal scale for making these changes. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Catherine. It's really nice to see a different perspective from what we are perhaps used, particularly in São Paulo, not being a coastal city, but with similar problems with flooding, right? So, and just to remind everyone, although the Klimapolis laboratory, we have started in São Paulo and working with partners in São Paulo, we do have partners in other areas of Brazil, and particularly in the Northeast. Most of the metropolitan areas are coastal cities, and they have the same issue that you experience there, and more. So it is important to have this perspective as well. We are planning to work with coastal cities as well. So thank you very much for your talk. Just another reminder to all the participants: if you want, just put your questions. Don't be shy. Put your questions on the Q&A. I'm sure that the speakers of this session will be happy to answer your challenging questions. So let's move now for our last but not least in this session, my good friend Renato Anelli from University of São Paulo, campus of São Carlos in Brazil. Renato is a professor and researcher of the postgraduate program of USP São Carlos, with interest in developing research on modern and contemporary architecture and urbanism in São Paulo. He's a former Secretary of Construction, Transport and Public Services of the City of São Carlos, and he is a current advisor at the Council for the Protection of Historical, Archaeological, Artistic and Touristic Heritage of the State of São Paulo, CONDEFAT. And he's also a very active partner in the Klimapolis laboratory. So Renato, I guess, is going to talk about his experience in São Carlos, talking about the urban management in São Carlos city, from activism to urban environmental design. Renato, the microphone is yours.
Nico, it's nice to see you, see Anita, Catherine, all the partners and friends. It's a great opportunity. Thank you, Ana Paula, for making this possible. So I will show you something about our experience in São Carlos, and at the end I will wrap up with some remarks on Itaim Paulista experience that we are having with other professors and Ana Paula and the Itaim Paulista lab. I will share my screen for a moment. This here, okay. This here. Yeah. So this is me, as you can see, a little bit younger, 20 years ago, supervising a channel in São Carlos the day after a flood in the business center. Very interesting. I will talk about this experience, but from a specific point of view, that is how we moved from the activism to this urban environmental design, and now back to activism, and how this role, this position, changed with the time. So the problem is, the problem is in a city like São Carlos, is this conflict between avenues and streams. As you can see in this survey of 1970s, the original stream were all with meanders, with this original track. And in the 70s, it was channelized, this straightened and channelized. And this makes some problems for two aspects. One is the flooding and erosion, and the other is this is against the environmental Brazilian law. So in 1995, this NGO, Associação for Proteção Ambiental de São Carlos, sued the city for not respecting the permanent protection area in road projects. As you know, these areas means 30 meters from the side banks of each of the river or of the channel. In 2000, the court condemned the city to stop the works and ask for permission for this to continue the road project. At the same time, the Workers' Party won the election and the members of this NGO become part of the municipal government, become responsible for the environmental policies of the city government. So in 2001, the new municipal government accepted the condemnation and started to develop alternative plans respecting to the APP, the preservation area, to sign a conduct adjustment agreement. That actually was signed 4 years later, but it was, as it was in negotiation, each project that I will show you were approved by all the parts, the court and the public ministry. So this is the effect of the flooding and erosions. And this is the areas of permanent preservation that you have this distance to be preserved or renaturalized, revegetated. I don't know how to say in English. The problem was that we have this network of creeks, small creeks, on the streets, on the territory. And this was an urban challenge, because how to deal with the continuity of the city and the renaturalization of this buffer of 30 meters each side of the creek. So this is for us was an urban problem. We start with the projects for the ring of avenues that was uncompleted, and we need to design the new roads observing this distance, these buffers. The first one was we start to look for space to keep distance from the water here, and this was with some compensations in other places. So this is the first that was approved in 2004. So here is the situation during the works. This is how it was, just very close to a concrete channel, and here how it becomes. This is during the construction. Some years later, as you can see, there's a strong vegetation now, all in this buffer zone. So this is a kind of linear park, but is associated with the road system. This is how it is near our campus. The second one was near downtown. This area that was a place, there was a factory, a plant here, demolished, and we need to build this road again, and then we opened the space for a green park, and here we worked. That was impossible to take the distance from the water, from the banks. Then we assigned some compensations in other places of the city. So this is how it is now. See some pictures of this park here, 15 years later. Here is my favorite. This is, we decided not to build the road here. And it was already covers the creek by concrete structure. We proposed to remove the structure, making with some nature-based technologies of construction. In this case is raw timber, raw logs of eucalyptus, and with some protection of the. So this is when you remove the concrete canalization this channel is like this. So some pics of how it was during the construction and how it is some years ago. People open gates on the backyards of their houses, because this was the back of the houses, just to go to the new park and to live in the park, and dwellers opening this new entrance for the new park here. And this is how it, almost like that, with some erosions yet, but these the plants, the vegetation can stabilize it with after some. So you have this situation sometimes, and it is surviving yet. The other one, the last one that I will show you is this environmental compensation. You have this point of the city with the drinking water abstraction areas, and this is a spring that was part of the producing drinkable water for the city. This was near this settlement here, and with a huge erosion, despite the fact that it is in the green area of this parcellement. So the problem was we tried to make something more landscape, beautiful in sense of landscape, but with the retention, but there was it was impossible to apply to develop this project because this was actually a rubble landfill underground, 5 meters high. So we developed another project with the concentration of the runoffs here, and stairs to take it down with some green infrastructure to stabilize the banks. So this is how it was soon after the implantation, the construction, using biomaterial and hydro seedings. I was just in the inauguration. It's very interesting to say that soon after it was cleaned from the rubble landfill, all the surges come back, the springs come back. So the supply of water is a problem of the design of this kind of device. So this is how it was. Is soon after the construction here, and this is how it is now. So it's this was in 29. I don't have any aerial view, recent aerial view, so this is how it is now in this point. And this is another case. It's just to some kind of retention with low impact on the landscape that we did in this point. This was a park that was built in the 70s, but with problems of erosions from the runoff that came over the streets. And this is a boxed stream, a boxed spring actually, and erosion. So we developed this kind of barriers that make a kind of retention all over the site, and with this we reduce the speed and of the water going down to the lake. This is a small pool actually, and we opened the springs. Make it visible for people to know that here is from where your water came. So after 3 terms of the Worker Party in the city, the new municipal government abandoned the maintenance of these infrastructures, and but that conduct adjustment agreement remains as a resistance piece for keeping the integrity of these previous works. And for the other hand, these nature-based solutions, kind of, are working quite well in these 15 years, keeping stable the banks of the creeks and sources, despite this lack of a good maintenance. So in somehow this legal piece of the conduct adjustment agreement is very strong to stop any new project that propose a road system again over this park. So this is important. And also many of our former students became architects, officials in the city government. So they are still there, and they are defending these interventions from inside of the city government. After this, so we are from the activism to the administration, and then back to the activism. And my question after that is, what's the role of the universities? I think now is to propose experimental urban design and planning. So that's why in the 2014, we discovered the Itaim Paulista and the Lajeado stream as a problem, because it was very it is still very close to this new bus rapid transit corridor that's proposed by the strategic master plan. So how to deal with this corridor, this road infrastructure for public transportation, public transit system, how to deal this with the renaturalization of this terrain, and to make the distance, to make space to build some nature-based devices for avoid flooding that's affected very much this basin. Not only this basin is part of the Tietê basin that is very a huge problem for the city in big flooding. So this is we start to work this in 2014. We make a workshop with the HafenCity students, but at that moment we felt that something was missing. We didn't have any contact with the ground in the sense of these labs. And then after this workshop, someday working with Ana Paula, I said, well, so you have these students from the site, from this region. So why not to make something together with them? So that's soon after she proposed this to the São Paulo meetings, the planning by conflicts, and now I'm very happy to see 5 years later how this question become reality with your students, your architects. So it's with all this cooperation with the district administration. So congratulations. So that's it, people. Thank you for your attention, and I'm back for this conversation. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Renato. Just really nice to see the work with a different perspective from someone working with the government and trying to really solve the problem that really affected people. So before we move to the questions, we have 2 questions here, and people, please put your questions to the panel. Yeah, I see Fernando is back, so excellent. So I'll put a question to start warming the speakers, the members of this panel. Like Fernando mentioned, he showed the picture of people in Chile. The population, they have power as a group. Once they find that they have this power as a group to look for something and ask for something and demand something, they have this power. But at the same time, from the academia, working with them, and Anita have this experience working with the community in Lokstedt. My question to all of you, with different perspectives, different experiences, different countries, what are the main challenges that you experience when talking, but at the same time exchanging this knowledge with the local population? What are the main challenges when talking about the necessary changes, but also the possible changes? Because not all they want is possible, not all things that the academia propose, it's something that they want or even need. So what are the main challenges in your experience when talking to them? And then perhaps bringing this back to the policymakers. How are the challenges in this, let's say, 3-way partnership between academia, population, and policymakers? And I'll leave to anyone start. I'm not going to pick any of you. Just unmute yourself and answer, please. Who's going to start? Catherine, please.
I unmuted my mic. That's always a signal. Yeah, I think that's a great question. And having worked for many, many years in Jamaica Bay, I just showed one project, but we've been embedded there for some time as an academic sort of think tank. in a way. And I think what's very interesting in this tripartite relationship between the academy, the local population, and then the policymakers is, who do you trust? And I think I'm speaking from the point of view of the community, which really sometimes feels used in some ways by the constant demand to have workshops, to talk about what do they want, to have these panels that they need to come to and participate, and then nothing happens for them. And then another one convenes. So I think a lot of the role of the university, frankly, is to really build trust with those communities, that we are actually listening to their needs and then acting almost as an intermediary and a visionary thinking role that can then speak with agencies and political, policymakers and the real change forces on the ground. There are so many different communities in Jamaica Bay, and it's a very interesting snapshot of a kind of urban ecology. There are communities of firemen and policemen, all white, who live in the middle of the bay in one community. There are highly dense public housing facilities that are near the water's edge on the backside of the bay on the Rockaway Peninsula that are all Black minority communities that have been really kind of placed there in a very, very, racist way in the 1960s through this construction of public housing in floodplains. There are communities of Eastern European immigrants who have more wealth and money who really don't want to talk to anyone. So there's so many different communities. And I think what is best in some ways from the academic side and really coming from the perspective of the environment is to bring this notion of this is your shared backyard, and there's a commons here. And despite all of the differences in how people got here and what kind of equity they have and capital they have, that we're there to listen and really think about what is best at a kind of larger scale that really shows there's a community that's shared. And I think by building that trust over years, one actually is able to then empower those groups where they're the ones making the demands, as we see in the Chilean example. Like there's a kind of ground up uprising that really asks for change, that wants to be supported in the conditions of flood that they're experiencing every day, that is suspicious of a government that's always demanding a new runway, right? So I think there's a way that they're kind of, you can encourage an environmental activism within the populations, even though they're very heterogeneous, very, very different, that actually then becomes very loud and clear to the policymakers. So I think in some ways, the academy and working with students, I think also creates a sort of more closer connection between people on the ground and that academy. It's actually, these are often kids from those neighborhoods that have come to the university.
Yeah, and I guess that was something that Anita particularly found, this trust issue when working with the local. Anita, please.
Yeah. And part of the challenge is also how to create a long-term perspective. I mean, the way the university works, at least with such activities, is through project funding. Now, it's very limited time slots that you have, and typically, and that happens many times in such projects, that you go there, you start building up relations, and then funding is over, you have to leave, or you're not interested anymore for academic reasons because your career brings you to a different place or whatever. And then it's all, it's lost many, many times. And I remember that I've also discussed this with Ana Paula when we try to compare the labs to so many initiatives or so many people who just try to make use of all windows of opportunities that show up to create somehow this constant flow, and you need to have some people who have this long-term perspective and who are willing to engage, and the citizens, they live there, they are always there, and they see projects, experts, universities come and go, and for them it can be extremely frustrating. So this, how to deal with this short-termism in project funding is also a big challenge, I think.
Yeah, and Fernando particularly, he mentioned about the importance of participatory process, right? So it is really much giving the voice to those who, for whatever reason, don't trust or don't have anybody. Fernando, your experience on this work with, or the need for that?
Ana Paula and I started the research project with a premise, the premise that there was a fate dilemma between participatory processes and the authoritarian, let's say, the knowledge of the profession, that they were working against each other. So we see that as a fake dilemma. We see that it's completely possible to reconcile the knowledge of the profession, our technical decisions, our science-based decisions with the participatory input from the communities. And it's the only way possible to avoid the dark side of modernization, which is every time we build a new, let's say, sewage plant or water cleaning plant, it's dumped on a community that have the least power to resist the pollutant new infrastructure. So I think we have a long way to go in terms of our profession. I think we are still very elitist. I see here in the United States a very powerful movement this year after the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, of all schools of architecture and planning. Planning was ahead of us, architects. Planning was many steps ahead, but all the schools of architecture finally understanding that our design discipline is very attached to white supremacist policies and trying to find ways to reckon with it. I do think that many of the possible solutions come from the global South. I was this week going back to Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, the most cited author in education field worldwide, the most cited Latin American author of all the disciplines, because there's something there on how to empower the communities to make decisions for themselves. But that means that we have to give up the fictional power of the architect that we believe we have, that we believe that the architect is the center of the process. It's not. We are one more little pad on this large engine, but we can be a pad for improvement, or we can be a pad for regressive kind of policies. So I think the profession has a reckoning coming on those policies, on those processes. We have a reckoning coming with our own elitism, but I am more optimistic now than I was last year, despite the pandemic, despite the fact that we are all stuck in our homes and severely limited. I'll stop here, otherwise I do another presentation. Thank you, Nico.
Yeah, but I agree with Fernando. I mean, I want to be optimist as well and believe that tomorrow is going to be bigger and better. Otherwise, there's no way of... Renato, I just want to, in the same way of these challenges, but you sat on the other side of the table when you were part of the government. So there was a challenge in work, particularly in a party like the Workers' Party, right? Where you have this, historically, this connection with the population, but so you were on the other side of the table. So what were the challenges when discussing with the population in these issues?
Well, this is a good question and good challenge, because I think we have, when we talk about to open the university and the academic sector to the society, for my generation, the political challenging was to have in our horizons to be part of a government, so in a model of governance that is based in participatory process. So all these projects we implemented were submitted and approved by participatory councils, participatory meetings for the budget of the city for each year. So this is, I remember as the director of public works to go in Sundays to the outskirts of the city and say, okay, this is our project. What do you think about this? And at the end, we should vote. And if we lost, this would not be implemented. So this is a challenge. On the other side, that agreement that we had with the public ministry and the court, that legal agreement was the condemnation was very strong and was on our side, because otherwise the regular normal solution of gray infrastructure should be done, because it's easier to do that. It's part of the chain of production of the civil construction. So you have firms that do that, can do that in the next year. And for this, we took years developing technology, developing with university and engineers, how to deal with, to transform this idea in intervention, because green infrastructure in Brazil, we have some special challenges because of the weather, the intensity of floods, and so we have some our plants, our vegetation is different from other countries, and so we should adapt to this idea for the real condition of our grounds. And so we work together with the university, with the colleagues that remains in the labs at the University of São Paulo and Federal University of São Carlos, with students and researchers. So this is a good moment to be on the other side, but with this this bridge, how to extend the research to the society. And this is important. This is a crucial moment to think about our reality in Brazil now. You know that federal government and now the state of São Paulo government is reducing drastically the budgets for research. So they are directing the research for some items, some subjects, and reducing in all other sides. So there's no more a clear independence of research decisions. So this is very hard now, because at that time, university was a space that you could look for new solutions without the obligation of be well succeeded or not. So this is, we are living in hard times that I hope we can survive this moment. There's a question for me about the building costs.
Yeah, I was going to ask you straight away this one, and if you can answer just quickly this one.
Yeah, very. I don't have now the building. I think the implementation of the green infrastructure. It was cheaper than the concrete reinforced concrete solutions. We use the reinforced concrete solutions in some cases. And but wasn't easier, because we need to develop the technology or find the technology to implement this infrastructure. So now it's more common, and the main problem is to open space for the infrastructure, because green infrastructure needs space. So you have to expropriate some areas and remove dwellers to places close to that, the construction site, because you need space to implement this kind of infrastructure. But we talk about later.
Great, thank you. So just for the speakers, if you see the chat box, there are lots of messages congratulating for this, for the talks, and thanking everybody for the nice presentations and the discussion. So just move to one of the questions that we have in the Q&A from Gisele Yamauchi. So she's saying about the cost of adaptation, which is kind of prohibitive in the global South countries, particularly those particularly developing countries, right? So is it time to bring back to the table, to the international arena, and discuss this, how the developed countries can support more the developing countries with the cost of adaptation projects? Not only, and I will add this, not only the financial cost, but the human resource cost, because then I guess it brings back the issue of the graduates in architecture and other, which can be, are needed to bring the technology, to bring the knowledge to this. Again, if anybody wants to jump in. Catherine, please.
Very briefly, I mean, I'd like to echo what Fernando said. I think actually the global North has a lot to learn from the global South in terms of adaptation. So in fact, I think to the questioner, it's more about us learning from the South, like the North, our so-called advanced culture, which has, you know, very systemically put people in harm's way and done all of the wrong things, whereas there's a little bit more nimbleness and adaptability kind of baked in some ways in the way cities have evolved in the global South. And so I think that for me, in any case, looking back to practices which are not so advanced, let's say, is actually kind of a better solution. So I think that there's some really, yes, it's the time to create that interlinking exchange. And there has always been this incredible hemispheric affinity between our, you know, North and South Americas. But I think we've got more to learn from you. I'll just put it that way.
Thank you, Catherine. Any of the other speakers want to jump in on that? No. So if any of the, Anita, please, yes, sorry.
Yeah, just a thought. I mean, of course, the funding is always a problem, but it's a problem also in the North, and I think one important lesson that we try to learn from our project is that if you want to do mitigation or adaptation, it's always very important to combine it in the closest possible way with local priorities, that they can be completely in a completely different field. They can be health related or just the quality of life or economic well-being, I don't know. So I think it's really important to combine these priorities and somehow try to reconcile them. And I just wanted to mention that there is, of course, a lot of transnational cooperation. There are the city networks, various types, you know, Pedro Jacobi, who's I think also in the audience, is part of ICRE, for example, and there are other networks of cities that try to organize, I mean, with limited means, but that try to organize this exchange of expertise, of experience, of funding to get a better hand on these problems.
Thank you, Anita. If any of the other panelists who were in the first session, if you want to have any questions, or any of the students, if you want to ask a quick question to the speakers of this session. Since everything is quiet there in Brazil, it's time for lunch. Here's almost time for the Friday happy hour, right, Anita? So if there, I don't see any open questions here. So I will first, so I'd like to thank you, Anita, Catherine, Renato, and Fernando for the really, really nice talks and this discussion, which certainly encourages everyone to keep trying to look for solutions. And thanks, Catherine, for saying we have something, we in Brazil have something to teach as well. And I think that is important to, and I think that is just a plug to the Klimapolis laboratory. I think that was something that since the beginning, we never intended to come and say, oh, the Germans are coming here, the Germans are going to tell you what to do. No, since the beginning was a dialogue. And I think we are proud of that. And I think Anita and Rita would agree with me that we are always challenging ourselves to talk more and more among our partners from Brazil and Germany to learn with experiences on both sides. Right, so I think that is important, and I think that was the way that was the Itaim Paulista lab was created, and the discussion with University of Texas was the same. The dialogue between partners to learn together and bring what could be best for the society that where you are trying to study, understand, and help. So once more, thank you very much for your participation. It is thanks for your time. I know everybody is busy, so I'll give back the word to Anna to close the session and the event. Thanks, everybody.
So I would like to thank you so much because it is a wonderful dialogue. This is the base of our intellectual production in the university. Without this dialogue that we have, we don't have nothing to write and nothing to produce and nothing to imagine for our cities. And then you are my partners and are very brilliant into giving back these words and these dialogues for our students and our university. Thank you very much, Anita, Catherine, Renato, Fernando, Ivan, Rita, Letícia, Andrea, Nico, and my beautiful students, Thais, Bruna, Mari, and everybody who is attending this meeting. It is a large group of dialogue we have here, and I'm very happy with the results, and I hope it is only the start point of our collaboration. Thank you so much, and have a nice evening in German and a nice Friday in US, and here in Brazil a nice lunch.
Thank you so much.
Very much, Ana.
Obrigado.
Thank
Tchau,
you.
gente. Valeu.
Tchau,
Bye,
gente.
thank you
Muito
very much.
obrigado.
Bye.
Bye.